The bell missed a beat, and the town folded inward like a mouth closing on a scream. They told themselves it was routine. They told themselves it was practice. The speaker crackled, a hollow authority that filled the classroom like air. The tone, clean, mechanical, should have been a rehearsal. Instead, the sound pressed into the marrow of the building, and something inside woke. Miss Alvarez had taught middle school for 12 years. She knew the pattern of small disasters: spilled paint, broken bones, love affairs played out in the margins of worksheets. She had run drills until the motions were muscle memory. Lights down, voices low, door locked, blinds down. On paper, the drill was a promise. Practiced, it conferred safety. The tone cut in, and Ms. Alvarez felt, rather than heard, the lock crawl across the classroom like a spider. The door clicked. It was one of those small, dry sounds that announced a change of state. Her hands found the laminated roster, and she counted heads. 27, 28. Her voice, steady, did what voices do in rooms of children. She became the answer to their questions. No one answered back. The lights dimmed in staggered breaths. Fluorescence shivered, then steadied, then flicked once like a tired eye. In the hush that followed, a laugh threaded through the room. Not the bright, brittle peal of a student. It was small and slow, as if someone had dragged a recording through mud. Heads turned, eyes went wide and found nothing. "Kayla?" Ms. Alvarez asked, her voice small, the teacher's voice detached and procedural, even as her stomach clenched. Kayla's hand sat on the desk beside her math book. Her fingers were still. Her mouth formed a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She mouthed something, and Ms. Alvarez couldn't make it out. Then the smile broke as if someone had cut a string, and Kayla's face smoothed into blankness. Ms. Alvarez walked the aisle with the stride of habit. Each desk was a small island. Names stared up from plastic nameplates like quiet accusations. The intercom hummed. Someone in the office said a word, and it came back as a distorted echo. The drill tone came again, and the sound found a seam between bone and mood where it lodged. Where it touched the building, the walls seemed to inhale. A classroom door down the hall slammed without wind. The janitor's keychain rattled in time to a rhythm that had nothing to do with calendars. They tried the phone. The handset returned a line of static, a throat of white noise that sang the distant sound of children playing. When Ms. Alvarez dialed the office, the call rang in her ear, but never connected. Each ring loosened something in the school. Each silence after a ring stayed heavy like a held breath. The windows fogged from the inside, tiny crystals dotting the glass. On the other side of the hall, someone began to whimper. Then the whisper rose like an answer and multiplied. The classroom blotted into a sea of tiny sounds. The scrape of a sneaker, the creak of a backpack strap, a throat clearing in a way that might be coughing and might be a different kind of clearing. They were supposed to be safe. That was the quiet promise schools made to towns. It was written in the architecture. Low shelves, soft corners, a nurse's office with bandages and sympathy. It was taught in calendars and circulars. A safe place was not a place that could pick at its seams and reveal a mouth. The lights failed again, just for a breath. The children's small faces glowed in the shallow after-image. When the lights returned, they did not come back the same. Shadows pooled at edges of desks and seemed thicker, as if something had poured ink under the furniture and left a sheen. "You okay?" Ms. Alvarez asked, because asking was easier than admitting she was not. A dozen voices said yes in a chorus, too rehearsed to be true. One of them cracked. The crack opened into sound, and from down the hall a child's voice, no older than 9, sang a little jingle. It was a song the students used to play on the playground. It sounded wrong in the bright, stale air. The door handle gave a small, deliberate rattle, not enough for anyone to reach it, but enough to make them reorder toward the center of the room. The eye wants to see a threat that can be named. The mind wants a shape to the worry. There was none. The building itself seemed to be testing the edges of fear, like a hand at night, mapping where it could reach. When the intercom came alive a third time, the voice that spoke was not the principal's clipped tone, but a raw, dry whisper swallowed whole by the speaker. "If you hear laughing, do not answer it," the speaker said, like a rumor read aloud. The sentence landed, and then the line hung dead. No one knew who had said it, or why it could call itself by a speaker. Ms. Alvarez took the children into a corner and set them down cross-legged, hands folded the way they'd practiced. She taught them to breathe. She gave them something to hold. The ritual comforted. Outside, the town learned how to be a different kind of quiet. Motor engines cut off mid-idle. A woman trying to fetch her daughter from a neighbor's house met eyes with a man who pulled his own child in closer. Doors latched. On porches, people watched the sky as if expecting the threat to land like a plane. Rumors migrated the way gulls circle. There was a masked figure at the north entry. There were shapes in the playground. There were children counted twice and missing once. Everyone tuned their radios and found static. The grid of a town turned sideways and read only what it didn't want to. When the school phone finally clicked open, it gave a voice like glass. The secretary said 3 words, and then the line died as if someone had clipped it with scissors. "Lockdown. Do not leave." Her breath trembled in a way that could have been fear. It could have been a signal someone else had dropped into her ear. In the days after, people said the drill had taught them to be quiet. In the moments of it, the building taught them the opposite. They learned how thin the promises between people could be. After the tone cut, Ms. Alvarez kept her class as still as a held coin. The laughter slowed and drifted like a badly tuned record. It came from the vents. It came from inside the lockers. It came from the janitor's closet where the paint smelled wrong. Every time they thought they could find the source, it budged. When the office finally opened the door, a sliver, someone leaned in and whispered it was a malfunction. Someone else whispered there were kids hiding in the gym and they couldn't get them out yet. Someone said not to go to the windows because the things outside liked to see faces pressed to glass. The whispers layered until no single story seemed reliable. They waited for rescue the way people wait for weather to pass, with blankets, with rice, with prayerless prayer. Time stretched. Teachers took turns being the person who could unlock a child's fear with a joke or a paper game. Miss Alvarez told stories she had told in other emergencies, stories with safe endings that had the right rhythm to bring people back from an edge. The children repeated lines like chant until the rhythm steadied their breaths, and still the building asked for more. A child in the second row began to draw on her notebook. At first, it was the doodle of a bored afternoon, stars, hearts, the cartoon dog from last month's reading assignment. Over the course of 20 minutes, her lines tightened, and then coalesced into something that had been impossible a half hour before. A small circle with a darker core. The circle had a slit and something like teeth. When Miss Alvarez looked the girl up, she was humming under her breath, as if the drawing had a soundtrack. The teacher covered the page with a hand and felt the paper tremble. "It's only ink," she told herself, "only paper." Still, the circle felt like an invitation. The drill was supposed to produce control. Instead, it revealed how little the adults knew the machinery at the building's heart. The locks were not simple anymore. Doors groaned in sympathetic alignment. Stairwells bent the light into shapes that could read as people. The ventilation hummed like a throat, an animal intoning its own name. Ms. Alvarez moved down the list again. Names, faces, birthdays. She anchored them in small facts of identity, favorite foods, pets, colors, like stakes hammered into the ground to resist being unmade. The children clung to these, and for a while it worked. The world could be held down by small truths. Near the middle of the hour, a pair of shoes slipped under the door. The silhouette of feet stopped, and an invisible hand seemed to shake them. Ms. Alvarez felt the vibration through the wood. Something listened on the other side. She crouched and whispered back, more to the shoes than to the door. "Go away," she said, "please." The shoes did not move again. There was no one outside, or if there was, the something outside did not want to be recognized. The school had acquired a new mood, the presence of a thing that preferred the edges of perception. It worked like a predator that hunted by question. It made people wonder whether to look for answers or to pretend understanding. The teacher felt the moral weight of both choices in her palms. When someone announced, in a voice that had found itself somewhere in the building, that the drill could not be cancelled, the classroom shivered as if the floor had been struck. It locked the code into the system. A maintenance man said over a static-laced call, "We can't override it." The language was bureaucratic and false. It offered a logic where none fit. One by one, bodies in the school learned what it meant to be patient without hope. For the students in Miss Alvarez's room, patience read like a geometry problem. For the adults, it was slow and hot like rust. The longer it stretched, the more it invited people to think of other things, of leaving, of running, of the sounds of engines starting. Each forbidden thought felt like a cliff edge. To think too loudly was to invite notice. Outside, rumors sharpened into stories. A group of parents at a corner gas station swore they saw a man with a white mask stand under the overpass and clap. The clap echoed across the street and sounded like a child's applause. A man who worked the bakery said the crowd at the bus stop had looked at him and then at their children in a way that said they were considering options that had once been unimaginable. Inside the school, Ms. Alvarez clutched a small plastic dinosaur she kept for bad days. She passed it around. Boys who had never touched the thing handled it as if it were a talisman. The toy made no difference, but rituals are stubborn. They fill gaps. They make a scaffolding for a fragile faith. When the laughing stopped at last, it did so, like a clock wound down. The air that had been vibrating with it collapsed into a silence so absolute the children could hear their own breath. The intercom clicked, and the principal's voice came through, thin and unfamiliar. "We are working on this," the voice said. "Stay put." Then the line went dead. The promise remained, the impression of a thread left hanging in the room. Ms. Alvarez sat on the edge of her desk and let the class breathe together. They were bound by the memory of shared fear, made intimate by the physical reality of shared space. The room felt sacred in a way schoolrooms are not supposed to be. The teacher thought about the absurdity of her job in a new light. She had always taught facts and figures and the essentials of the human world. Tonight, she taught how to keep breathing. When the lights finally came back fully, when the lock's tone resolved into nothing, the children hugged their knees and watched Ms. Alvarez as if she were the center of the planet. She tried to lift the mood with a joke the way she'd taught retirees to lift sagging ceilings, a small, light-hearted thing, and even that joke tasted like battery acid. They filed out later into a town that smelled of rain and burnt toast. Adults gathered at doors, the ritual checks and reassurances echoing with something older. People spoke in small, careful sentences to keep the world from tipping. Yet beneath the words, there was a tremor that couldn't be explained away by logic or policy. People had been left with an image of their children in a room that, for reasons beyond the horizon of knowledge, had chosen to ask questions it did not want answered. It was the sort of night that left marks that took time to show. In the weeks that followed, Ms. Alvarez noticed the way some children stopped drawing circles. Others began to repeat the school's drill tone under their breath, a secret chant. Every so often a child would look at the windows and flinch, as if remembering the way the dark had once moved. The town told itself a version of events when the evenings cooled and neighbors drifted to their porches. They said the drill had scrambled something small and private, that it was a technical anomaly. They rolled the explanation out with tidy hands and placed it back on shelves labeled "Unusual Night." The truth, if truth existed in a town, was messier. The truth was that the school had discovered a way to be hungry, A week later, a little boy in Miss Alvarez's class walked up to her after school and gave her a folded piece of paper. "For you," he said. Inside she found a drawing, a smiling sun with a circle in the center, a slit drawn with a black pencil. The student smiled like it was a prize. Miss Alvarez felt something like a chill under her skin and tucked the paper into her desk drawer, somewhere between the stapler and the emergency contact list. She did not throw it away. If there was a first story to tell about that night, it was this. Ritual can become call. The exercises meant to protect can, in the wrong moment, perform the opposite. A safety plan is only as good as the assumptions you make about the world. And the world does not owe you those assumptions. If you want more twisted lockdown tales, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. After the small, sharp sting of the first story, the town folded its attention like a hand cupping a fragile thing. They tightened locks. They checked every hinge. They asked strangers about their kids. They traded details. Stories cross-pollinate. Rumor and memory breed in crowd spaces. The first tale became a seed. It found dark soil. Maplewood did not sleep well that night. It never seemed to after that cold bell. People counted windows, counted lights, counted the swings left idle on the playground. They found comfort in lists, but lists do not always keep the world at bay. Rachel watched the clock swing like a pendulum. Her phone had gone to voicemail the moment the tone hit the air. She pressed the power on and off, as if that simple act might unstick the city. On the kitchen counter, a glass reflected her tired face like a water ghost. Ethan's backpack lay by the door, half-zipped, a faint scent of peanut butter lingering in the zippered pocket. He had left in a hurry that morning. He never ate lunch at home anymore. Middle schoolers are a category of absence, half lost to friends, half to screens, all moving like weather. She tried calling again. Each ring carried through a world that was locking down in stages outside the phone. Her neighbor shouted across the yard and then dropped his voice as if the air had ears. Cars pulled back from the curb, lamps turned off. People withdrew into small private shells. Rachel had been taught the laws of emergencies. In the same brittle ways teachers teach syllables, evacuations, exits, muster points, lists and maps. She believed in systems because they allowed her to apply order to her fear. That night, the list refused to hold. On the second call, Ethan answered, his voice quick and small. "Mom?" He sounded muffled, as if speaking from the bottom of a bin. "They called the lockdown. We're all in the gym." The word left her unformed. "I'll be there." She ended the call, and a static-laced noise filled her ear like a reminder. She could hear the muffled sounds of the town going inward. Somewhere, a dog barked. A siren stumbled far off. Rachel dressed like she was leaving for war. Practical shoes, jacket zipped to her chin, keys held like a promise. The streetlight through the curtain flared and formed a band on the kitchen floor. She stepped into the night, and it consumed her with the kind of cold that remakes skin into memory. Maplewood had a map of itself that became obvious in small lights and neon signs. Families had paths that snaked between yards and porches. Tonight, those paths were flanked by people supplying each other with rehearsed reassurance and shaking heads. "It's just a drill. It's a glitch. The principal says—" All of it sounded like someone saying a spell with the wrong syllables. She walked to her car and felt the city bearing down, not malicious but terribly attentive, like a living thing evaluating a plan. The radio in the vehicle scrolled static, and then the recorded voice of an anchor reading words that stepped around meaning. Local schools under lockdown, residents advised to remain indoors. The voice gave the town a name it had always wanted to avoid. Rachel's boots hit the pavement, and she moved toward Maplewood Middle. The school sat like a stern animal at the end of Main Street, its brick face the kind of architecture towns built to present themselves as stable. Tonight, those bricks were a theater. There were people at the corner who looked like ghosts in good coats. A man with a neon safety vest stood in the periphery like a question mark. He raised a hand at her and then lowered it. His mouth moved in a shape that might have been counsel. As she neared the building, Rachel saw the line of police cars. Their flashing lights cut through the wet night like a fractured heartbeat. Officers clustered in tight groups, their uniforms lonely in the glow. People on porches watched them like moviegoers. A parents' group had formed by the chain-link fence, some of them slack-jawed with a child's name trembling on their tongues. The air smelled of rain and exhaust and the faint metallic tang that comes when too many people have the same fright. The school's doors were locked, as if the building had decided to keep itself closed. A few teachers milled about the entryway, their breath fogging like ghosts. A woman in a high-visibility jacket kept repeating, "Stay back. We have to wait for clearance." The voice sounded official and small. Rachel pushed. Doors refused. She tried calling school numbers, each line clipped to silence. From the perimeter came long tones, announcements meant to be official but somehow hollow. "All students are to remain in place. We will update you as information becomes available." The words came from the loudspeaker like a parent reading a bedtime story with a hand that shook. She found a group of other parents along the sidewalk who had gathered into a jury of the worried. Their faces formed a tribe of small anxieties. One woman held a child's sneaker. Another clutched a sports roster like a Bible. They told each other pieces of the same rumor. Someone had seen a masked figure in the north corridor. A teacher had smelled something like wet paint. Someone had heard a child's laugh under a stair. Then a mother named Denise said, "I called Ethan's friend. He says they saw shadows moving on the bleachers. Not people, not shapes. Movement like a wind." Her voice went thin at the end. She looked at Rachel as if she were a sounding board. Somewhere in the push of joints, the town's social fabric began to fray. People looked at one another in ways that had a currency of suspicion. A neighbor's closed curtains read like proof against communal duty. A man who had been the coordinator of the PTA now walked like someone trying to remember the secret handshake. Under stress, the small civilities of a town melt away into something older and more selfish. People choose to hide. People choose not to ask. The quiet becomes a policy. If Ms. Alvarez had learned small rituals of breathing, Rachel knew the language of decisive movement. She was loud in a group, a woman shaped by single-parent nights and overtime. She found the front office, and it gaped like a wound. The secretary's desk was empty. A paper sign told them to stay back. Someone pushed and found a halt. The metal in the frame vibrated the way a tuning fork does. She went around the perimeter. The gym doors were bolted. The chain-link gate leading to the stadium swings squeaked when the wind touched it. On the other side, officers had formed a cordon. A man in a mask, he had been wearing it since he stepped out from his car, paced with his head down. When he looked up at Rachel, their eyes met, and something small, human, and therefore dangerous, crossed his face. Recognition of another parent's desperation, then a refusal to act on it. He mouthed something. "We can't." It was the hinge of the whole town. In the crowd, a teenager laughed at something offhand, and the sound was brittle. The laugh snapped like a dry twig. Rachel looked at him, and she thought she saw a hardness there she had not expected. Young people are often reservoirs of a different kind of courage, reckless, brittle, and not yet learned to fear. She remembered Ethan at 12, delicate humor, a knobby chin, a voice that cracked in the middle of the sentence and made her laugh. She rolled that memory into her chest to make a hard stone. She found a teacher by the chain-link fence who had a sweatshirt with the school's initials. "Is he—" Rachel started. He shook his head. "Some of them are in the gym. We're trying to get a roll call," he said. "We think some kids were sent home. Some—" He blew out a breath. "We keep hearing—" "Hearing what?" Rachel pressed. He swallowed and looked away, as if the sound were an answer he didn't have any business knowing. "Sounds, singing, Laughter like recorded tape. Every time we go in, the patterns shift. The intercom cuts in with this voice. We can't find a source. It's not possible, Rachel said. But even as the words left her mouth, she felt the air bend. She pushed closer to the building, ignoring the barricades and their thin, official sanctity. Her feet took her around to the back, to the place where the playground opened like a pocked landscape. The swings were still. The merry-go-round had a thin coat of dew. On the far side, the slide reflected a pale moon that looked like a cold coin. Rachel's throat tightened at the sight of the school's courtyard. That place of small victories and scraped knees, rendered silent and still. At the gym entrance she stopped. Someone had scrawled a word in chalk on the concrete step. Wait. The letters were large, urgent, then smeared as if by a hand that trembled. The chalk had been here before the night. Someone had written warnings in that language people use when they have no other tools. Rachel ran her fingers over the chalk and felt the powder, cool and ephemeral, as if someone had left a breath on the world. Inside, through the high windows, she could see silhouettes, bodies stacked on the blue mat like fish in a net. Excited whispers rose and then fell, the peculiar way children attempt to make mischief in crisis. A boy tapped out rhythms on the gym floor that sounded like the heel of survival. The lights inside were flashing, each flicker turning the faces to masks. The air looked different, charged and charged again. The gym smelled like floor polish and crayons, as if the ordinary had been laid over a new wound to keep it closed. Rachel found an opening in the fence and crawled through. The metal scratched her palms. A woman with a child's jacket clung to her like an extra limb and whispered, "My son is in there. He was near the stage." She was only half there, brought by the edges of panic. Inside the gym, the doors were locked. She banged on them until an officer pushed the window and shook his head. "Emergency protocol," he said. "We have to wait for authorization." "He's my son," Rachel said. "My boy's in there." The officer's face said the thing that settles like frost between strangers. He could not give her what he did not have. "Mom," a voice called from the other side of the building. It wasn't Ethan's. It was a child's voice that rose in sudden clarity. For a moment it threaded up and seemed to hold a suggestion of something else, rhythmic, pleased. Then the sound was submerged. Rachel pressed her forehead to the glass and watched the pale light inside. There was a group of kids huddled near the stage. One of them had the hood of his sweatshirt pulled up, his fingers bent like talons on his knees. He looked like a small animal that had forgotten how to be human. Another child, a little girl with 2 braids, swung her feet and whispered nonsense that sounded like the cadence of a song. Between them, shadows slunk in angles the light did not like. In the bleachers, a boy was missing from his seat and no one reported it. There was a pressure that moved across Rachel's ribs like a hand. The crowd outside began to make assumptions, and assumptions are kindling. Someone said the masked figure had been seen near the stage. Someone else said it was only the janitor. Someone who had been late to the game swore they had seen shapes like fingers pressing against the inside of windows. Rachel wanted to go in. Wanting is a dangerous currency. The officer gripped her arm and said, "Ma'am, I can't let you." The word couldn't have its own gravity now. Rachel felt a thing inside her that had been sleeping since the night Ethan was born lift its head, the animal that does not wait for permission. "Then open them for me," she said. "Please, for him." He swallowed. For a moment his face was a map of choices. He answered the only truth he had. "We have to follow orders," he said. "Orders, rules, protocol, all the things that paper promises." They were strings that did not necessarily attach to anything at all. Rachel circled the building, looking for a teacher who might slip her in, anything that would let her touch the air her son breathed. The lights in the gym winked like false stars. A line of windows along an upper corridor glowed with a sickly blue. From them came a neat, childlike chant, repeated over and over, as if some small speaker looped the sound to fill a gap. The cadence of it became unbearable. It hooked into bones and chewed. She found a maintenance door left ajar, slightly. Someone had been in a hurry, someone with keys who had not closed the world they escaped from. She slipped inside, and the hallway swallowed her, cool concrete and the low hum of ventilation. The air tasted metallic. At the far end, a fluorescent light buzzed like the last insect in a jar. Down the corridor, doors lined up like teeth. Each one had a small rectangle of glass, and everyone's face looked taller in those little windows. On the plaster, a map was bolted, and someone had pinned a note to it with the word evacuation on it. And that glowing word read like a prayer written in a child's hand. The hall moved eerily, sound folded and refolded. A door at the end had a small handprint that was not smudged, but like a taste, deliberate. There was a rhythm under the footsteps, a soft, sliding cadence that did not belong to shoes. It felt like the building flexing empty muscle in preparation. Rachel climbed the concrete steps 2 at a time. At the top landing, a classroom door was open. Light spilled out, and in the doorway something leaned. It was not Ethan's height. It was a child, small, hunched. It turned when she made a sound, and for a second the face looked like anyone's child. Hair, small teeth, a nose with a freckle. Then whatever was watching stepped out of the light, and the face lost the texture of a kid. Its eyes were too fixed, too still. The child, if it was a child, reached out and tapped the glass with fingers that looked too long in the light. Rachel's breath stalled. The thing looked at her, not as if she were a person, but as if she were an idea. "Mom?" it asked in a voice like a spoon on tin. The syllable hung and then thinned. She moved closer, every step measured. The hallway smelled faintly of chalk and wet shoes. From somewhere above, a child's laugh rolled like marbles. "Ethan," she said, testing the name, letting it be a key. "Ethan, where are you?" Silence answered at first. Then the sound came, a small scrape, the ratcheting of something being shifted from one world to another. The child in the doorway smiled, a wide, exaggerated reflex that would have been playful if it hadn't been so wrong. Its mouth opened a fraction too wide, and the ceiling lights hummed. Rachel reached, and the thing recoiled like a mirror, stepping away from its reflection. Behind it, a classroom door stood ajar. A blackboard had been wiped clean by hand that was too steady. On it, faintly, a word had been left. "Come." She took the step, and her foot found a sliver of paper on the floor. A child's drawing, but incomplete. A playground, a swing set, a small stick figure with a scribble above its head. In the scribble, a circle with a slit in the center. "Ethan!" she called again, louder, voice cracking in a way she allowed. The hallway pitched in response. Lights flickered, and the speaker at the far end hissed like a throat clearing. Something moved in the classroom, and the air tasted like copper. She pushed into the room, and the door slammed shut behind her, not locked so much as decided. The air sucked in, and the light folded like a curtain. In the sudden dark she could hear the breathing of children, the whisper of feet on linoleum, a chorus of small heartbeats. Her hands reached for light switches, for anything, but the room retained its own rules. The kids were seated in a semicircle facing the chalkboard, as if they had been arranged for a story. Ethan sat among them, small and still, hands in his lap, eyes wide and lowered. He looked at her, and his face registered relief, and then something else that made her bones buzz. He was present but not present, like a radio left on a station tuned to the wrong hemisphere. She moved through the tight arc of their bodies and saw the way their pupils reflected the single strip of light in the room. The reflections made little twin moons in their eyes. The laughter had been reduced to little tickings, the cadence of something sated by attention. Rachel knelt in front of Ethan. He smelled like wet paper and pennies. He looked up at her, and a smile unfolded that was not his. "Mom," he said. His voice carried an echo as if from a cavern. "We were playing a game." The door behind them exhaled, A mirror leaned against the back wall, a freestanding thing that had no place there in a classroom. It reflected the room, but with a small wrongness that set her teeth on edge. In it, the reflection of the children had a depth the actual bodies didn't. The reflected Ethan looked a breath older, or maybe younger. The mirror played with time in a way that hurt a little. Somewhere underneath the hum of the lights, there was a pull like a tide. The mirror did not simply show them. It suggested. It invited. It showed shapes pressed close to the other side of the silver. Faces peered in as if they were trying to find something they had lost. A handprint smeared where a palm had touched from the other side. "Ethan, we are leaving now," Rachel said. She did not know whether she was speaking to the boy or to the thing that had him. The sentence felt like a spell, one she did not know the words to. The children echoed the phrase as if copying what adults do when they want to be safe. A shadow moved near the mirror, a smear brushing its silver rim. The reflection shifted, and in that shift Rachel saw, with an animal clarity, a small, pale hand push from the other side. It wasn't a reflection. It wasn't the child's. It was a hand that belonged to the wrong depth. It slid like a fish under water and then found purchase on glass. "Don't," she began. The hand's fingers closed on the inside of the glass, as if to pull something through. Ethan's eyes glazed with a color that matched the everyday lights too well. He reached almost involuntarily toward the glass. The motion was small. She lunged to intercept him, fingers closing on his wrist. The mirror answered by changing the light in the room. Where before there had been a clean strip of fluorescent, now there was a concentrated point, a sheen that brightened and then cut like white through the pupils of the children. It hurt to look. The brightness was not merely illumination, it felt like an incantation. The room folded on itself, and the air hummed a note that made Rachel's fillings ache. Children's breathing thickened into a rhythm. The walls seemed to lean. The chalkboard chalked itself with a child's neat handwriting. "Come home." The letters were precise, a child's scrawl that looked like a small accusation. Ethan turned his head and met Rachel's gaze. For the first time that night, a shred of his usual mischief slipped through. "Mom," he said again, less a plea than an observation. "They say you've got to want it." A strangled noise rose from the doorway. It sounded like laughter and also like a lock clicking. The light in the mirror pooled. The small hand pressed harder. Rachel's fingers tightened on Ethan's wrist. Her thumb dug into the soft skin. She felt heat and bone, and the small animal certainty of a live child's being under her palm. She would not, could not, let go. The world had a grammar of choices, and this was the rawest one. Hold on and risk being torn. Let go and become something else. Behind her, in the corridor, someone cried out, a high, unnameable sound. The room answered by shrinking. The air was a sausage skin, pulled thin. The mirror's surface did not reflect her face. It reflected intention. It pulsed, as if living. Rachel pulled. Ethan's hand grazed the mirror's cold face, and his fingers brushed a smear on the other side that left no mark on glass, but lifted something in the air, like a fabric. The smear was the outline of something small and human-sized. A child's handprint in the wrong place. She pulled again, and this time the mirror resisted. Not a physical resistance she could measure with muscle, but a tense moral tug, like a question asked by the world of her. What are you willing to trade to get what you love? Ethan's small hand curled and then flexed, as if testing the water. For a terrifying second, the pull felt like the weight of the whole school leaning against them, and Rachel understood in a way she could never have learned from pamphlets and emergency drills. Some things cannot be fought with procedure. You fight them with insistence. She tightened her grip and spoke his name, as she'd whispered it to him when he learned to walk, when he woke from nightmares, when he scraped his knee and wanted the hurt to mean nothing. Ethan, Ethan, look at me. Look at me. His eyes flicked, bright and dull, all at once. Memory splintered, a cartoon phrase, a shared joke about a monster under his bed. Mez of the ordinary braided into a rope. "The dinosaur," he said, the word threading out like a lifeline. He'd given her a small plastic dinosaur the week he'd made a new friend. He had insisted it ride in her purse once when she drove him to soccer. She wasn't sure why the image rose. Maybe because the toy had been passed around class earlier. Maybe because a child's mind will choose any door out of a darkness. "Remember the dinosaur," she said. "He bites the dark, Ethan. He hates dark." The mirror pulsed with light as if eavesdropping. From the other side, something answered, a smear of voice that doubled and then split into several. The children's breathing in the room became a chorus, steady, then jagged. The small hand on the other side of the glass flattened, pressing like something wanting passage. Rachel dug her nails into Ethan's wrist and pulled. The mirror fought by throwing images at her, a version of Ethan standing older, smiling at an empty classroom. Another of him small again, sleeping at his desk with careful hands folded over chest like a sleeping bird. The mirror offered choices like bait. "Come," the images said without words. "There is no waiting here." She felt panic like frost through the marrow. The teacher in her first-class emergency drills, the lists, the voices calm and sure, none of it had prepared her for a child's hand that wants to be taken. For a moment she nearly let go, imagining the sense of being granted what they were asking for, a reunion, a tidy relief. But she reached instead for the unfinished parts of his life, the homework he had tossed in the sink in a hurry, the scuffed sneaker in the mud, the way he hummed badly when he was nervous. She let those small human things fill the space between them. "Your backpack," she said. "You forgot your compass in the pocket. You promised you'd show me how it spins. Remember? You always make it spin and say the world is full of secrets." Ethan's mouth moved like a mechanism. For one terrified sliver of time, his face found the shape of a smile he used to use with her alone. Lopsided, sincere. "Compass," he whispered, and his fingers curled into her sleeve like an anchor. The mirror's light cracked. It threw a thin, blinding blade across the room, and for that second the thing pressing from the other side revealed its edges. Not a solid body, but a suggestion of limbs and many faces layered like leaves. The hand on the far side came down a fraction, and then recoiled as if it had been burned. Rachel seized the moment. She pulled with everything she had. Muscle, memory, the whispered promises that mothers learn by living, and Ethan stumbled toward her as if surfacing from deep water. His shoe scraped linoleum, his knees buckled. She caught him, collapsing against the circle of children and the low, synthetic glow of the classroom. Someone behind her made a small sound like a sob, and then a laugh, too small to be wholly relief. They were not alone in reaching for something. Other hands in the room grasped at other children. A boy with ears too big for his face clung to the sweatshirt of a girl who had been humming the playground song. A teacher at the far wall dove and caught a child's ankle. The mirror's sheen tore into tiny threads that fluttered and dissolved like silk in a furnace. For a moment Rachel thought the room would unmake them all, absorb their edges, not in anger, but with the same neutral hunger that takes shape around any thinness in a map. She held Ethan to her chest and felt his heart stutter, then right itself. He smelled of wet coats and the faint sweetness of applesauce. He was warm. He breathed her name like a recitation that would ward off storms. The light in the mirror went high and then low, as if someone turned a knob on a floodlight. When it finally cleaved to blackness all at once, the glass showed only the room, small people, and a teacher who looked at Rachel with a face newly lined by strain. The mirror had no more mirrors behind it. The silver had become what it pretended to be, a surface that could be smashed if someone found the will. Someone did. A child at the back, one of those small heroes who acts by instinct rather than calculation, kicked at the mirror's base. The sound of breaking glass was not the cinematic crash she might have imagined. It was thin, like the noise a dry branch makes, the mirror spider-webbed, and in the crack the light flared like a low sun. There came a sound like a held note letting go, and an animal whine that might have been grief or hunger. The edge of the silver curled away, and for a second the other side seemed to yaw and heave like a mouth. Rachel's hand closed on Ethan and she ran. They left behind the room that had decided to show them other things. They burst out into a hallway that smelled like bleach and lost afternoons. Somewhere someone screamed, a sound that could have been prayer or accusation. In the corridor, the fluorescent light steadied, as if nothing had disturbed them. People streamed toward the gym doors, toward the exit, eyes wet and unsteady. At the gym entrance, officers moved like sentries with a new, weary tenderness. The crowd outside parted in a way that felt choreographed, as if a town had rehearsed how to look at someone carrying a child home. Rachel's legs felt like rubber. She kept Ethan close until his breathing matched the cadence she knew by heart, until the heat in his back felt enough like home. They found one of the teachers standing by the bleachers with her palms out, fingers spread like someone showing open hands after a hard bargain. Miss Alvarez's face looked bruised by sleep. For a dizzy second, the two women regarded each other as survivors with different tasks. One had kept a class, one had found a son. There are bonds that form in the presence of shared terror, welded quickly by small acts of care. Outside, the town had become a museum of worried faces. People walked like they carried small lit candles under their shirts. Conversations were short, snippets of explanation and fragments of rumor braided together. Rachel held Ethan so tight his breath hitched, and then smoothed into a slow rhythm. He muttered the compass word again, and then fell against her, exhausted in a way that made her stomach drop. They did not have answers. "It opened," a teacher said to whoever would listen. "It opened and looked thirsty." The description was literal in a town that used to trust lists. The word opened meant more than an unlocked door. It meant a thing had surveyed the edge and decided to push. That night, they drove home in a convoy of headlights and held silence like a prayer. The town had reopened some of its routines, the grocery, the pharmacy, but the normal had a new tilt. People watched each other closely. A man who had been jovial in the morning sat with his head in his hands on the curb. A mother unlatched the car to retrieve a blanket for a child, and did it with a deliberateness that was almost ceremony. Rachel tucked Ethan into bed when they arrived, the ritual choreography of home feeling dear and sacred in the wake of the night's thing. He slept with his palm clutched over the center of his chest, where he said the compass would turn. She left a small light on and sat in the doorway to listen to him breathe. He slept like something that had survived a storm and would have to learn how to trust wind again. In the morning, Maplewood spun a story around the incident that would be easier to live with. The school board issued a statement about a technical error. A maintenance crew wrote a report about unusual electrical interference. Television vans came and spoke in smoked words about the psychology of panic. People liked explanations. Explanations are tidy like jars. But Rachel kept the glass shards of an older night in her mind. History had taken on a new angle. The town's idea of safety had cracks. They told themselves that the mirror had been an anomaly. They said that the building would be repaired, that locks would be inspected, that councillors and police and engineers would carry the town's fear like a manageable object. But sometimes at night, Ethan woke and hummed the drill tone under his breath. He did not do it as a game. He did it like a comfort, and the sound rubbed a small ache into Rachel's chest. Weeks later at the grocery, he lingered by the toy aisle and stared at a set of little silver mirrors that came packaged as classroom supplies. He picked one up and ran the back of his thumb over its edge. The plastic made the same faint noise the mirror had made when it had been struck and not yet fully obeyed. He smiled at it in a way that made Rachel want to lift him to her and never let go. "You remember the dinosaur?" she asked. He nodded, and then, without looking at her, He tapped his chest and whispered, "He bites the dark." The memory became a shield and also a problem. They had survived, but the shape of what they had survived remained unmade. A rumor started in the way rumors do in towns like these, a whisper at the grocery, an aside at the PTA meeting, an exchange at the bus stop. It fed on the spaces between people, the looks not given, the curtains slightly drawn, the playground swings left motionless. People counted their children's lives like a resource and thought about how to spend it. Rachel learned to go to the window at night and watch the hollow of the schoolyard, because she couldn't not. Sometimes the moon picked out a swing and made it gleam like a question. Once, in the old hush before midnight, she swore she heard the faintest pinprick of laughter on the wind, soft as an off-key toy. She opened the pane a small distance, and the sound curled into the room like someone reading the wrong page of a song. She shut it and hummed the dinosaur's bite until she could sleep. The school repaired the mirror frame and stacked it with other cleared objects in an evidence locker. Police sealed off a storage closet that had inexplicably become cooler than the rest of the building. Engineers ran tests that showed nothing conclusive. The town made pie charts and reports. It tried to make the night into a data point they could place on a shelf. But at 2 a.m, when the houses settle and the streetlights are the size of far-off stars, some children began to hum under their breath. They didn't always do it loud enough for adults to hear. They made the sound like broken music, like something that had been taught to them and then used in private. And when parents hear a noise they don't understand, the mind can build an entire architecture around it, scenarios that are mathematical in their dread. On the other side of town, someone peeled off and walked to a bench near the playground. They sat and watched the metal gleam, and then looked into the dark as if expecting something to step out and explain itself. A woman with a stroller crossed her arms and breathed out slowly, measuring the space by the beat of her pulse. It was not a tidy ending. It was a survival with edges. The mirror's glass had not been whole, and neither were they. The town learned in a slow and brittle way how to be watchful and small. It traded some spontaneity for caution. Books about fear got checked out of the library. People stopped volunteering for night shifts at the school. The PTA meetings grew, and in their margins the old friendships shivered. Late one afternoon, months after the night that rearranged their map, Rachel noticed a small, folded paper taped to the inside of Ethan's bedroom drawer. She took it out with hands that trembled a little and found a crayon drawing. A slide, a pair of swings, and above them a ringing bell. Around the bell, someone had scribbled a line of letters. Come. She balled the paper into a fist and put it into a locked box she kept beneath her bed. The lock did nothing for the world. It did something for her. It allowed her to hope that small objects could be contained. But hope, too, had its limits. They moved on in practical ways, because people must. Ethan returned to class. Miss Alvarez's name was mentioned in the town with gratitude and a weary reverence. The teachers continued to teach lessons and fractions and grammar, tiny, stubborn islands of work that the children clung to. Yet beneath it all, like an old song hummed out of tune, a question kept returning to the people of Maplewood. What does a safety drill do when it meets a thing that understands the language of repetition? How do you teach a town to trust itself again when the walls have proved they can listen? The answer did not come all at once. It came in small acts, parents walking their kids to the bus, teachers learning one another's faces in new ways, a neighborhood woman leaving a nightlight outside a doorway because she thought light was the best language to send to a child. The town learned to be gentle and vigilant in a single breath. But the mirror had not been the last of the things that watched. It had been the doorway that taught them the uglier lesson. Places made for safety can learn to ask for company. And when places ask, sometimes they do not mean well. Story 2. The drill should have been routine. Instead, it taught them how to listen. Mr. Hargreaves, had been the kind of teacher who measured authority with patience. He favored lists and laminated cards and liked the way the world arranged itself into rows. For him, a drill was punctuation, marking moments in the school year when the building practiced being a haven. On a bright Tuesday, he announced a lockdown drill to his high school geometry class, with the same steady cadence he used for equations. "We'll run it at 11 sharp," he said. "It's a practice. It's a promise." Their eyes tracked him, half bored, half accustomed. The intercom hissed and gave them a thin countdown. He checked attendance, told his students to tuck their legs under the desks, to make faces to be found by the emergency cards if anyone played hide, and then he turned down the lights for 20 seconds so the room would mimic the dull of a lockdown. When the tone came, something in the building changed its grammar. The doors locked as designed, the lights dimmed in slow, considerate pulses. Mr. Hargreaves felt that small, habitual satisfaction of a job done well. Then the intercom played the drill tone again, but this time it stretched as if someone had laid a hand across it. The single note split into an odd harmony that resonated in the fluorescent fixtures. The classroom walls took on a thin, wet sheen, like the inside of an oyster. One of the students, Lena, polished off the art of quiet faster than the rest. She was 16 and practiced at making herself disappear when discomfort worked its way through a crowd. Now, in the dark, she began to hum under her breath, an old playground rhyme her little brother used to make up. It wound through the room and found purchase in the ducts. The ventilation hummed back, almost conversationally, and Mr. Hargreaves felt a pressure like the school had leaned in to listen. The bulletin board's pins vibrated a fraction. Papers rustled with the sound of a heart. Then the classroom map on the wall recast itself. The pins that marked emergency exits drew themselves a hair's breadth toward another direction. It was a subtle thing, the sort of detail you could write off as a trick of light if you wanted to. But in the hall, the gym teacher's whistle sounded in time with the map's micro-rotation. The building, it seemed, was rearranging the rules by which it wanted to be read. "Everyone stay calm," Mr. Hargreaves said, "because words are scaffolding until they are not." He felt stupid and monumental at once. It was the best kind of terror, the kind that asked you to act like the person the world thought you were. He kept them to the script, counting softly under his breath, while the intercom line gave them a new instruction in small, scratchy phrases. "Do not open doors. Do not answer the tone." The tone doubled. It began to mimic small sounds the kids would know. Pencil taps, the whisper of a locker closing, the hollow clang of a cafeteria tray. Each mimic folded a memory into it. The student's eyes slid to the door and then away. A boy at the window whispered, "Did you guys ever hear it like that?" As if someone had asked if you'd ever seen a moon with two craters. What woke them fully was not the sound, but the way the building began to ask back. From the other side of the wall came a voice that sounded like a parent calling someone in for dinner. Warm, insistently domestic. Another voice began to sing a chorus of the school's pledge, line by line, but slowed like a tape on the wrong battery. The sounds were familiar in their terms, but wrong in intention. They lured. When the intercom cut in with a directive that was not in any protocol, "We like the quiet. Stay quiet," the students gave it a rational explanation. Maybe the speaker had picked up a radio station. Maybe a volunteer was pulling a prank. Mr. Hargreaves wanted to believe that the building, like people, sometimes misread its own moods. But the door to the classroom refused to be the same entry it had been that morning. The window pane reflected another classroom full of faces that did not belong to the school. Lena looked at the glass and saw herself older, and then the other. Lena winked back. For kids who had been taught to look both ways, the lesson had become grotesque. Reflection is not always an echo. They tried to call the office. The phone answered with the scrape of something being unspooled. The intercom laughed softly, and the laugh curled into phrases that none of them wanted to parse. "We don't like to be alone." The words were not unkind in pronunciation. They were kind in the way a predator might be kind to a favored snack. Mr. Hargreaves did the only adult thing left to do. He stood in the doorway and made a decision. He would not let the students navigate the new grammar alone. He moved quietly to the center of the room and placed himself between the door and the children. He told them small things, memories of popsicles, of a missed bus run that became a good story, filling the space with human static, making them a communal thing. The building tried to bargain. The lights dimmed until the classroom became a pool of shadow. A strip of brightness ran along the floor like a fault line. The intercom asked in tones that would have been soft if they weren't so thorough. "Would you like to stay?" Mr. Hargreaves answered finally, with the thing he had been holding for years, his voice, the memory of his father's handshake, the way he had promised himself he would always keep kids safe. "No," he said. "We are going home." With the word, the classroom did not reply in argument. It replied in patience. It made them wait. It taught them endurance in a slow, grinding way. The drill that had been meant to impart confidence now became a teacher of different lessons. How long a human lung can keep oxygen in the face of something tender and focused. The students began to hum together, names of colors, the multiplication table, nonsense rhymes. The noise became a fortress. When the doors finally opened an hour later, a girl from Mr. Hargreaves's class slipped out into the morning sun. Her eyes were bright and inhuman. She walked to the corner and sat down to watch the street, as if she were waiting for a bus that never came. She later told people she remembered stepping outside into a bright field and not remembering how long she'd been gone. She said with an odd slowness that in the field there had been a bell with a missing note. Days later, a child named Jonah was found near a highway rest stop, a town away. His shoes were muddy, as if he'd run through something wet and low. He stared for long periods and described in patient, distant tones a building that asked him to recite school pledges until he had no voice left. When someone tried to ask if he had been harmed, he blinked and asked instead if he could see the sun again. Mr. Hargreaves resigned at the end of the semester, his hands shaking in ways he could not steady. He said nothing to the press. He walked the path to his car like a man who had been excommunicated by something small and domestic. The school board called him brave in their newsletter and then put out a new drill program that ignored what had happened. The kids learned to hum under their breath the way people learn new prayers, not asked for, necessary. The drill returned every year on schedule, as a totem or perhaps as a warning. Each time the building reminded its occupants that rituals have power, and that power can misinterpret its intent. Story 3. After midnight, the school remembers what it used to be. Hector kept the campus clean. Night after night, he patrolled like a slow, solitary moon, moving a garbage cart down the tiled halls and listening to the building speak in pipes. He had worked nights for 15 years and knew which lights flickered and which faucets were delicate. He loved routine because it gave him something to measure the hours by. One stormy evening, the storm took the power out for blocks and left the campus with emergency lighting and a world of small shadows. Hector did his rounds and made notes on his clip pad. He liked to hum along with the building's nocturne, an old radio show, the old jukebox music that sometimes accompanied his sweeps in memory. When he returned to the main office to mark the log, he felt the air change in a way he would later attempt to explain with metaphors. Colder, as if the night's breath had a shape. On the security monitor, for the first time in his shift, the cameras began to register things that should not belong in the footage. In one frame, a line of lockers opened and closed like the mouth of a sleeping animal. In another, A classroom saw the slow, deliberate rotation of a small plastic horse, one of those decorations you tie to a pencil pot, spinning on the teacher's desk. The timestamp on the camera showed minutes, then hours, cycling like a finger tapping to keep time. Hector walked the halls and found the custodian's closet door ajar, though he had locked it earlier. He stepped in and felt, odd and tactile, the scent of something that could have been old fruit roll-ups or autumn damp, childhood mold. On the floor, a single small sneaker lay on its side, laces undone. It was tiny and clean. He held it and it fit into his palm like a question. He did not find a child anywhere. He called the office and left a message. The speaker returned only the sound of the storm pressing on the roof. He set the shoe on a shelf where lost property was kept and continued his rounds, because that is what a man like Hector did, collect misplaces until a person could claim them. On camera 3, the gym, someone had reset the jump ropes so they lay in neat, perfect rings on the floor. In the library, cushions arranged themselves on the floor in a pattern that read like handshake, 2 circles facing. A small paper boat floated in the drinking fountain, moving with the drafts of air like a quiet ship. Hector picked it up and found inside a strip of notebook paper folded into a tiny flag. On it had been written in a small, unruled hand, one word: wait. He laughed softly to himself, a human sound meant to empty tension. When he walked down the east wing, he found a Muppet sock puppet propped on a radiator and a child's crayon drawing of a field with an extra door drawn into the sky. The puppet's mouth had a faint smear of something that looked like berry jam. He pocketed the drawing because it made him think of his own grandson. Back in the security room, Hector watched the cameras all evening, and in the corner of his vision he saw movement that the camera did not register as a person. He called the 2-way he kept clipped to his vest and spoke to the dispatch line. "Anyone else on campus?" he asked. The line breathed static and a voice said, "Just you." He laughed again, more nervously, and the laugh made a sound on the monitors of something that was, properly, laughter bent through a filter. He had the sensation of audience, the building listening to its own jokes. Around 3 in the morning a new image flared on the monitor. The playground merry-go-round spinning slowly, though there was no wind, motionless in the real world. A child's giggle layered over the footage, slowed as if played back on low batteries. Hector walked the campus until he stood under the faded swings. The metal felt cold, like an old coin. A little toy soldier lay in the mulch, as if left by someone in a hurry. He picked it up and turned it over. There was a scuff of paint on its chest that looked like a tiny fingerprint. He felt suddenly like an intruder in a world that asked for a different kind of permission. When he was about to put the soldier in his pocket, the chain-link fence by the courtyard rattled as if a small hand had brushed it. The sound did not belong to the storm. Hector climbed the steps to the second floor to take a last sweep. At the far end, he found a classroom door open, light seeping like a wound into the hall. Inside the classroom, there were chairs stacked in a manner that made them look like a circle of seated people. A child's paper crown lay on the floor, and when he crouched to pick it up, he heard a faint sound behind him, whispering close to the base of his skull. He turned and saw nothing, but on the green chalkboard someone had drawn a map that pointed to the school's old water fountain. Hector walked there and bent to peer into the basin. The water reflected the emergency light, and then, for a blink, the ceiling looked like a sky he had once seen. He saw a small, pale face in the reflection that was not his own. He left the campus as the sky began to grey, and he drove home with the small plastic soldier on the passenger seat. He told his wife about the things he had seen in the way men tell stories of small fears. Half eager to be believed, half embarrassed for asking attention, she nodded and made him coffee, and made. That day he found a childlike note in his jacket pocket beneath, and he did not know when he'd put it there. When he unfolded the paper, there was a child's handwriting. "Thank you." The words sat on the paper like a charm. He kept the soldier on his nightstand. Weeks later, when his grandson came to visit, the boy asked for the soldier and took it like it had always belonged to him. He asked Hector if the school had missed it. "It must have fallen out," Hector said. The boy put the toy in his pocket and hugged his grandfather. That night, Hector awoke to the sound of someone humming the school's old hymn outside his house. He went to the door and found the street empty. On Monday, Hector turned in his resignation. He said the night had been too loud in a way that made sleep impossible. The district thanked him with a letter and a small gift card. On the table behind him, in his kitchen, the soldier's paint had a small new chip on its chest. At times, in the late quiet, Hector wondered whether the campus had simply been remembering itself, its own life, echoes of play and learning left in the grout. Or perhaps it had been hungry for the small things it had been denied, the footfalls of children, the chorus of lockers closing. He couldn't know. He only knew the small object in his pocket and the way a child's drawing could make a grown man feel like he had been given an invitation. He kept the soldier until he couldn't. Once, late, he set it on his porch where the rain could take it. The next morning it was gone. Story 4. They thought breaking in would be a dare. They never considered the building would accept. The group called themselves the Night Owls, seniors daring themselves to touch the school after hours to prove they were not cowards. It was a ritual performed in many towns nationwide, an unofficial rite where courage got measured in squeals and the number of times someone texted their friends a shaky video. This night felt ordinary because the seniors made it ordinary. They scaled the fence under a silver smudge of moon and moved through corridors that smelled like rubber and jam. Their flashlights painted the walls like the sweep of a second thing trying to be real. They took photos by the trophy case and left their names in condensation on a window. Their bravado tightened into noise. They made jokes about ghosts with cadences meant not to frighten, but to bind. At midnight they gathered in classroom 13, the old English room with a chalkboard that liked to absorb names. They chalked their monikers in a ring like a makeshift fraternal crest. "We will not be scared," they said. The words were a dare and also a contract. Someone dared the group to write names on the board. It began as prankish humor, leave a mark, then leave a memory. A pen slid over the slate and letters darkened. They wrote names of actors, their favorite athletes, whispered an ex-boyfriend's name into the pad of chalk. Laughter made the rafters look friendly. When a new set of names appeared beneath theirs, they laughed at first. The letters were the same handwriting as the kids in the morning, neat and childish. But as they leaned in, the chalk-spelled ones they did not remember writing. June, Maria, Tommy. For a minute they accused one another. The fluorescent above them buzzed in a rhythm like a metronome, and in the rhythm their nerves thinned. One of them, a boy named Carter, who liked the texture of fear because it added grit to his confidence, reached out to erase a word. His hand met the board. The chalk resisted like scabbed skin. Then the letters blurred and ran as if someone had cried on the slate. Beneath the smudge, the names had already begun to fade from the world. Panic is contagious in new ways when it's shared. They tried to run, but found corridors extended like trick mirrors. Stairs led to the same landing you had just left. The school's geometry altered like an argument about angles suddenly solved. A room they had passed 5 minutes ago appeared again, door ajar, light pool spilling. The building folded and unfolded itself like a book being read by a hand that did not understand punctuation. One by one their phones lost bars and then lost battery. One of them, Anna, began to feel like her memories had a soft place where the building wanted to nibble. She had the odd sensation of forgetting someone she had loved. She couldn't remember whether she had ever been to the creek behind her house or if the idea sat in a book she had once read. The sense of gaps made her heart run like an animal. The prank turned into a trap. They found themselves sitting in a circle on the library floor, backs to shelf spines, as if books could hold a wall against the world. Chalk moved under no hand and wrote names around them again. Each time a name was written, the person associated with it paused as if being measured. A door creaked, and in the threshold a figure made of hallway shadow put a palm to the frame, like it was waiting for fingers to match it. When they finally pushed at a door with both hands, the hallway beyond them melted into something that looked like the outside, but with wrong proportions. Trees shorter, moon-stretched. One of the night owls, a quiet kid named Mateo, stepped through. He walked like someone who had no opinion yet about the shape of fear. Then the group saw him stumble and looked up to find his face peeled of recognition. He walked away, slower and slower, like a person answering a call no one else could hear. The school took its due in ways not entirely equal. It kept memories, it seemed, and returned them later with soft abrasions. The survivors left changed, the smallest edges of their lives missing. A favorite song's chorus, the taste of their mother's stew, the color of their first bike. They told the story like exam questions. What did you remember losing? They could not always answer. Sometimes their own names felt like foreign concepts. One of the group, Iris, carried around a pocket-sized photograph she swore had shown her with her father at a lake. After that night, the photo's image was faint at the center, and the man in the background's face had been rubbed away. She slept with the loss like a hunger. A year passed, and when they tried to talk about it at reunions, they found their sentences short. The school's doors were now bolted at all hours. The fence had spikes. Warnings were posted. But the seniors knew what they'd learned. If a place likes to be visited often enough, it might begin to take pieces of you to keep as souvenirs. Story 5. The bell missed a note, and the note became a name. Mrs. Pruitt had lived in Maplewood for 38 years. She had taught kindergarten, and then retired with neat satisfaction. She liked bell rings because they marked the world, time made audible. When the municipal bell on the school tower went slightly out of tune, she noticed it first because she listened for things other people cut out. One afternoon while watering her geraniums, she heard the town bell toll. It was off by a fraction, just a single missing pitch in a sequence she had known all her life. She paused and placed her hand on the railing. The omission made her think of a lost tooth. Something small missing made the mouth feel wrong. She checked the obituaries and found nothing. She called the principal, no answer, and then the line went still. She walked the block to the edge of the schoolyard and noticed, pinned to the gate, a small rectangle of paper with a child's face drawn on it. Beneath it, someone had written a name in careful block letters. Sammy. The idea that the bell could carry names felt nonsense if you said it out loud. But names have a gravity. They pull people like a current pulls leaves. The bell had missed a note, and in its missing the town heard a space that wanted a sound. People began to tie small slips of paper to the bell ropes, names of lost things, names of remembered children, names they feared. It was a superstition born of desperation. Perhaps if you told the bell the name, the town might remember it back into being. Every day more names appeared on the fence. Lydia, Miles, June. The list grew like a garden of paper flags. Parents came to the gate and read the names aloud, the act itself a kind of incantation that turned letters into a sound that could be heard possibly by children away from them. One night at the bell tower, when the moon had a small silver coin face, a parent climbed the steps and stood in the dark with the rope wrapped around his hand. He rang the bell once, slow and deliberate. The sound came out broken, two pitches that sounded like the bell swallowing its own tongue, and in the space between the two tones something breathed the name he had placed there. The man stepped back. The bell did not ring again. He ran back down the stairs and told no one, because vocabulary does not hold what the body recognizes. But rumor traveled, as rumor does in towns. Someone had heard the bell say a child's name. Folk in Maplewood began to treat the bell as a ledger. They pressed names to its wood, pinning fragments of memory. The bell took in the letters and kept them in the way a belly keeps seeds. It did not always return what people expected. Sometimes a name that had been pinned would be gone, and a child in town would wake up humming the school's drill tone and know the name they had never been told. One morning a woman knocked on the mayor's office and demanded the bell be silent. She wanted no more names added, no more small rituals that might invite something to keep them. The mayor, tired and wise by small city politics, weighed the cost, a superstition that soothed or a thing that fed. He chose to put up a small metal box where people could deposit names and a sign that asked them to limit the number they attached to the bell. The box was both a containment and a concession. It made people feel like they could participate and also be reasonable. Even with the box, the bell continued to miss its notes. People adapted. They tied ribbons to the playground fence and hummed the drill tone into their pillows at night. Old rhythms turned into talismans. When a name disappeared from the fence, neighbors held their breath and then eventually told the story again. In Maplewood, stories were how people explained their misgivings. They made each other laugh, and then, when it quieted, shivered. On the anniversary of the first night, when the building had shown them new edges, the town gathered at the bell. People stood in clumps of light and shadow. They held infants and small dogs and coffee cups with handles that warmed their hands. They watched the rope move in a small, slow loop as someone younger than them gave it an experimental tug. The bell sang in a note that had something like mourning in it. The missing pitch was there and then absent, the sound a craft made of absence. In that absence, someone in the crowd felt a name like a hand brush their arm, and they turned to see a child who had once been in this town years ago now walking away, looking oddly older and yet not. No one could say whether the bell had returned someone or merely reminded them of loss. The question did not matter. The town had learned to live with its uncertainties. If you stand near the bell at night long enough, the sound becomes a map of omissions. It will never be a full compass. It will only draw around shapes it finds useful. But in its missing notes and thin calls, the town discovered a new way to remember, one that involved paper, memory, a small brave rope, and the kind of hope that doesn't need proof to be true. Epilogue. They told 5 different stories that year. A teacher, a mother, a janitor, a group of teenagers, a bellkeeper, all had their small encounters with the places a town believes will shelter them. In each story, the school, which had once been a refuge, asked for company and then, because asking is a form of hunger, took something in the end. Some things were returned with small scars. Others were never wholly given back. The motifs braided together. A laugh that wasn't quite laughter, the long electric hum of fluorescent lights, the glass that showed a depth that didn't belong to the present. Playgrounds grew still. Mirrors kept secrets. The drill tone that was meant to secure the present became a chorus that haunted the margins of midnight. Maplewood adjusted its calendars and its playlists and the way it taught the kids to breathe during drills. But beneath the adjustments there was a quieter, older change, a wariness wrapped in tenderness. Parents watched with a new carefulness. Classrooms learned to be more than rooms. People stopped taking the ordinary for granted and spoke of small protections, a nightlight left by a window, a toy tucked under a pillow, a neighbor's knock at the door at strange hours. The smallest acts of ritual worked in the same way the bell did, by making absence into something you could touch. And sometimes that act worked. People lit candles in windows, and the candles seemed to offer more than light. They offered the shape of attention. The school, for all its hunger, did not always answer to hunger the way a wild thing does. Sometimes it answered like a place curious and lonely, and the answers were inconsistent and confusing. On a clear night, months later, as the moon rode low and fat in a sky with the city's hum in the background, Rachel stood by Ethan's window and watched the schoolyard. The swings were empty but not eerie. Their motionless state spoke more of calm than of menace. Beside her, Ethan thumbed a small compass, smiling at the way the needle never ceased to find its own north. "Does it still scare you?" he asked, as if he were testing the world and wanting to know if fear would be a helpful companion. "Sometimes," Rachel admitted. "Sometimes it does." Ethan tapped the compass against the sill, and the little piece of plastic made a steady, comforting sound. "The dinosaur keeps the dark away, remember?" he said, and when he did, Rachel laughed in a way that had a chisel of sorrow in it, but it was a laugh with room in it. As they turned in for the night, a bell in another town rang its schedule, and a distant speaker sighed with the mechanical breath of the morning. Somewhere out of sight, someone hummed a drill tone like a lullaby. In houses across Maplewood, curtains were closed with deliberate hands, and nightlights glowed like small moons. The stories do not end with a neat assignment of blame. There is no moral ledger where every debt is repaid. The haunt persists in the way people say a child's name, in the way a town remembers to check for broken glass. Sometimes the haunting is a lesson about attention. The more you notice, the less the edges of a place can take you unawares. If this kept you up, subscribe and tell us which of the 5 haunts you can't shake in the comments.